How you doing again, people? You know what? With all this craziness taking place in the United States right now, it's easy to forget that there are other crazy things happening in the world. And I felt, given that I've just started hearing about this, I just started hearing it in the news yesterday, but didn't really pay much attention. I found this, and I'm going to watch it, first time watching it, and I kind of want to see what the deal is, because this sounds pretty, well, to use a word, nuts, quite frankly. I mean, it sounds like something from a film. So, and it all takes place in the great white country up north. So, let's have a look, shall we? Here we go.
Canada expels 6 Indian diplomats after the RCMP said it found evidence of serious criminal activity. These developments come after a high-level meeting between Canadian and Indian officials in Singapore over the weekend. David Morrison,
Well, the thing is, I
Minister of
know
Foreign
that
Affairs,
Canada had a
and
lot of
Anthony Bruin, the
issues
National Security Advisor,
recently
traveled
because
to
someone,
Singapore
an
to meet
activist,
with
was
Ajit
killed and there
Doval,
was
India's
connections to the
National
Indian
Security
government.
Advisor. They
So
were
is this
joined
connected to
by a
this?
senior official from the RCMP who walked them through the evidence the National Police Force had collected.
Okay.
That included intercepted Indian
Yeah, this guy.
communications and other information that the RCMP has found since the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
The RCMP, I believe, is like the Canadian
Canadian
version of the
feds
feds.
activists and sending those
I
details
think.
back to the government. And those activists were later threatened or attacked, or in the case of Nijjar, murdered. A Canadian official says Doval did admit that Indian diplomats collected information, but denied it led to violence and denied any role in violent acts in Canada. India also refused to waive diplomatic immunity and allow police to interview the diplomats.
Well, that's
So
pretty
just before
standard.
9
They're not
a.m.
just going to
today,
let
Foreign
them
Affairs
talk.
Minister Melanie Joly delivered the order expelling India's High Commissioner and 5 other diplomats.
And then
from
I'm
the
sure
country.
India did the same thing.
India responded by expelling 6 Canadian
Yeah, it's a
diplomats,
tit for tat.
including Acting High Commissioner Stuart Wheeler.
That's to be expected. Right, what's he going to say?
What India has long been asking for. Canada has provided credible, irrefutable evidence of ties between agents of the government of India and a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
Ooh.
Now it is time for India to live up to what it said it would do and look into those allegations. It is in the interest of both our countries and the peoples of our countries to get to the bottom of this. Canada stands ready to cooperate with India.
Dominic LeBlanc is the Minister of Public Safety, and he joins me.
That's
in
crazy.
now. Minister, thanks for coming.
So
in.
what are they basically saying? That the Indian government was like sponsoring or intentionally trying to like cause violence and murders in Canada? Is that effectively what they're saying here?
Very often, but they felt the need to do it due to the significant threat to public safety in our country. How would you describe this threat to public safety in our country right now?
I think you're right, David, to say that it was an extraordinary step. The RCMP kept me informed at a high level of some of this investigative work, but they concluded in their own judgment that it was important to disrupt and dismantle what was increasingly a violent, organized criminal effort, including the participation of 6 individuals who work for the Indian government, diplomats who were in Canada. It is unusual, as
now,
you
did
say,
they just work for it, or was it like directly sponsored by it?
They've collected over many, many months in a number of different investigations.
Not that it really matters when it's at that level.
Normally,
I mean, if you have effectively Indian diplomats encouraging violence in a foreign country, that's not good.
They thought that it was important to disrupt and dismantle this increasingly aggressive and concerning criminal activity in many parts of the country.
Yeah, how far does it go?
1 or 2 cities. I heard about it from mayors in different communities in Western Canada and Ontario, heard increasingly about it in Quebec. So the RCMP thought this was an important step to disrupt and dismantle this activity. The Minister of Foreign Affairs expelled these 6 diplomats. But David, they're also continuing actively a number
Indian
of criminal
diplomats considered person of
police
interest.
partners in almost a dozen Canadian cities looking into specific criminal activities.
So basically, Indian diplomats were potentially directly involved.
A dozen Canadian cities. There are a lot of numbers flying around today, and I appreciate there is a
multiple cities. How big was this network
then? Investigations. But when Commissioner Duhem and his deputy are talking about 8 people have been arrested for murder, 22 have been arrested for extortion, and you say a dozen Canadian cities. Are these all activities and incidents that tie directly back to the government of
Good
India
question.
and the diplomats they had in
Very
Canada?
good question.
Yeah, so I'm not involved in the intricacies of ongoing
And
active
he doesn't
police
have the answer.
operations.
Okay.
The RCMP shared with me a list of municipal police forces that they have partnered with as part of these different investigations. And I was surprised the extent to which so many Canadian communities were working with the RCMP in these investigations. So I think
this is
that
pretty big
Commissioner
then.
shared what information he can share. I have a lot of faith in the work that Commissioner Duhem does, the Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn, who, as you noted, was with other officials in Singapore. These are very experienced, very senior police officers who have taken a lot of time with the help of dozens and dozens of colleagues in the RCMP, and as I said, partners in other police forces and federal intelligence agencies. So I've had a privileged chance to see this remarkable work being done. And I think Canadians,
Okay,
and
so who's this in
particularly
the car
Sikh
then? Why are you
Canadians,
showing us this?
who understandably and have been sharing with us and publicly their concerns for the safety of their community, they need to know the RCMP are very, very engaged with other police partners, and they should have a lot of confidence that they'll
Yeah, I guess
continue
now
to
there's a
do the work
concern about
necessary to bring
a
before justice
backlash.
people perpetrating these crimes.
You say disrupt and dismantle. We've seen these arrests.
But this isn't
but
good,
the
though.
big
This
event
is
today
not good
was the
for
expulsion
Canadian
of
and
the
Indian
6
relations.
Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner to Canada. Is that dismantling a criminal
Especially if
organization?
they
in your
can't,
view,
if
kicking
India
out
won't
6
cooperate.
Indian government officials?
Well,
I'm not
again,
quite sure what
I
Canada
don't
can do.
want
I
to
mean,
speak for the
Canada's quite a small
commissioner.
country.
His news conference, he shared the
terms of,
details that he and the prosecutors
power
and
and
lawyers that would
economics.
advise him in terms of what's appropriate to share publicly. He shared what he was able to share. But if 6 Indian diplomats were expelled as a result of the RCMP evidence collected in this investigation, I think that speaks for itself. But it isn't the end of the story, David. This is what, in the RCMP's independent judgment, was an important step to disrupt and dismantle, to make it harder for this criminal organization to continue to perpetrate these increasingly violent acts. But they'll continue to do the normal police work that they do with partners across the country. And
Depends how far up it goes. I mean, if it goes all the way up in terms of, the connections to the Indian government, there really won't be that much
with the U.S. Attorney General,
absolution,
Garland,
so to speak. I mean, you can
Homeland
find the
Security
people who are
Secretary
still
of the United
here,
States,
but that's as
Alejandro
far as it's going to
Mayorkas,
go.
precisely to share with them the information.
I want to know why
that
the Indian
RCMP,
government cares so
were
much.
bringing
Why do
out
they
publicly
care?
today, but to urge them to continue
What is it?
to work
It's to
with
do with
us,
Sikh separatism
and to
or
share
something?
information the FBI might have, other American intelligence agencies. There has been
True. What does the United
very,
States
very
think about this?
extensive collaboration to date. They said that to me. They have thanked us in some cases for information that we've shared with them. But it's very important, I think, particularly Five Eyes countries, the UK, the US, for example, that this work be seamless. So I'm very encouraged that that'll be the case.
I was struck by the language you're using in this interview, but in particular the language that the Prime Minister used earlier. When we talk about stories like this, in my job, we have to use alleged, claim, allegations. There's none of that coming from the Government of Canada. You're absolutely convinced, it sounds to me, from what the Prime Minister was saying, that the Indian government is clearly involved with this. Otherwise, you're not kicking out these 6 diplomats.
Well, I was convinced by the evidence that the RCMP collected as part of a
Well, yeah, I think the reason they say things like alleged and stuff is because they don't want to go through a legal
over many months.
thing of like, it's alleged because you don't 100% know and you want to hedge your bets in terms of the legal implications if you're wrong. I don't necessarily think the Canadian government has to worry about that when they're talking about a foreign power. And what's India going to do? Like sue them for defamation?
And talk publicly about
the answer to that is
evidence
no.
if he's not absolutely convinced that this evidence is reliable and credible. And when the government is given that evidence, the Foreign Affairs Minister took, I think, the only decision that she could, and she expelled these diplomats.
The other thing that Commissioner Duhem says today, and this is from the written statement, that they have found links tying agents of the government of India to homicides, plural. There's an S there. we know of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. I know you were asked for a specific number, and I appreciate you can't do that, but that's not a typo, right? We're talking about more than one killing.
Again, I don't type out the RCMP
Killings
statements
connected to the
myself.
Indian
You would
government?
know, would you not, if it's more than one, based on us getting to this point?
I know what I read in the statement, and as I said,
Wow.
I know that these statements are vetted in great detail,
So many
precisely not
questions.
to
Why does
prejudice
India
ongoing
care
criminal
so much
investigations. The
about
last thing that they would
what
want to
goes
do
on in Canada?
is say something publicly that later becomes an excuse for a defense attorney
I mean, does
or for
Canada
a
have a
judge to
large
decide that for
Indian
whatever
diaspora
reason the
or
trial
something? Is there like a large
is going to be stayed,
voting
the
and
charges will be
political
stayed, the
reason for
trial
this? Does this make any sense?
will be aborted. So all of this stuff was very much in the
What's
hands
the
of the
end
RCMP.
game?
And
What's
as
the
I say,
goal?
I
What
have
are they trying
faith
to
that they
achieve?
used
I guess is the question, isn't it?
best language they could, and their statement speaks for itself.
But I mean, it is quite an alarming thing for Canadians to hear. I think you
True.
would agree, right? That homicides, violent acts, plural, extortions. We have seen all kinds
Connected
of
to
stories
a
in local
foreign
news about
power.
what's happening in South Asian communities, Edmonton, all around Toronto, the lower mainland of British Columbia. Narendra Modi
That's basically all the
nominally
major
leads a
metropolitan
democracy
areas.
and is invited to groups like the G7 to meet with the Western countries on how to deal with the problems of the day. But then we look at something like this. I mean, is India an ally as long as Narendra Modi and his government are in charge and operations like this are happening overseas?
That's a good question that
very good question.
the Indian government and Prime Minister Modi could answer.
How do you view them, though?
Well, I view it as extremely unfortunate that at multiple entreaties they have refused to participate with Canadian law enforcement and diplomatic officials in an investigation where senior RCMP officers and people as senior as the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, David Morrison, or Nathalie Drouin, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, are sharing with their counterparts details of evidence collected by Canada's National Police Force, that the Indian government would refuse to acknowledge the concern that in a rule of law country like Canada that values its territorial integrity, the sovereignty of Canada. We respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We wish they would do the same. And in circumstances where they couldn't, it's too bad that they won't participate with Canadian law enforcement officials.
Maybe they just don't respect Canada. Maybe they're just a bit like, well, what are you going to do about it, quite frankly?
Organized criminal network. And ensure that all of the investigative weight is brought to bear.
It's a
to hold
large
those,
landmass, but a very
before the justice system
doesn't
that
really have
perpetrated
that
these
much
acts.
power.
Can you help us understand
Relies very
what it
heavily
was
on the
about
United
this
States
point
for
in the
protection.
investigation and in the examination of these issues that led the RCMP to go to the Indian government and confront them with the information and seek the ability to interview the diplomats? Is it because of the public safety concerns? Is that what drove the timing here, or were they at a point in their investigation that they
And
needed
yes,
the
they'll probably blame
cooperation of
Trudeau
India
for it as
to
well.
move to the next step? Because I know this is something Commissioner Duhem said on the show in May around the Nijjar
Although
investigation.
Trudeau
that
should
they
really
weren't getting
step
the help
down
they
anyway.
needed. So has it just gotten to that point, or was it driven by public safety, as far as you know?
Yeah, and again, I want to be careful not to speak for the RCMP because these are independent operational decisions that they appropriately make on their own. But I took the Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn and the commissioners.
How long do we have left of this?
Words very seriously when they said they had a growing concern around public safety. And they thought that the moment had arrived
Okay, we're
to
almost done.
take this extraordinary step to disrupt, dismantle this criminal enterprise.
It kind of feels like we're... Yeah, okay, I'm
That
going to
was
stop
their
it here.
decision. I have a lot of faith that they
Okay, the reason I'm stopping it there is because it kind of feels like we've kind of covered all the broad points, and we're just going to be like giving the same answers in just a different way. So that's going to be boring. I don't want to listen to that. But that is crazy, though. That is pretty crazy. I would love to know why. What is India's interest in Canada that they would do something like that? Apparently, the Canadians feel it's an absolute. This has happened. This isn't a assumption. This is an absolute. Yes, they have done this. Why? What are they getting out of it? Interesting. It is interesting. I'll definitely be paying attention to this going forward. I really want to know why. Right, anyway, we'll leave it at that. Yeah, again, if you're still watching and you haven't clicked like or subscribe, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you may as well. If you like this, then you may as well click it and you can watch more whenever I publish it. So, yeah, night, take care. God bless.